Hello, and welcome to episode number 35 of Wrestlerotica, the podcast that combines wrestling and erotica. This week we have two stories to share with you. The first story is entitled Deadman's Comfort. In this story, Jillian Hall begins questioning her position in the WWE after being mistreated by fans. The Undertaker decides to take it upon himself to help her out. Story 2 is entitled Frozen Fire, Darkest Desire. In this story, The Undertaker decides to introduce Daffney to his other partner, Winter. They then spend an interesting night in the Undertaker sex dungeon. Without further ado, let's get to this week's stories. This story is entitled Deadman's Comfort, and it is written by fanfiction.net user Undertaker-Ghostman. Monday Night Raw. The booing of the fans had reached almost ear-shattering levels. And it was getting difficult for Jillian to hear herself sing. Of course, therein lay the problem. Jillian was the only one who wanted to hear Jillian sing. She had come out tonight to give the fans here a treat. Another one of her musical performances. However, the ungrateful twits had booed her, and the louder they booed, the more distracting it was. She couldn't focus on her song, and at this point, she gave up. "Fine!" she shrieked. "I was giving you guys a free performance from the bottom of my own heart, and this is how you treat me? Fine!" She threw the microphone down and stalked off to the backstage area, this time to a chorus of cheers. Jillian continued to pout as she got to the backstage area, throwing a fit and screaming about the unfairness of her situation to anyone who would listen, as the crewmen and superstars did their best to avoid her. Jillian continued her hissy fit all the way to her dressing room, and her fit caught the ear of someone else in the area. Someone rather unique, The Undertaker. Mark Calloway had been trying to catch some quiet time after his opening promo on Raw, but the sound of a woman screaming was preventing him from doing so. He headed in the direction of the disturbance, and then asked a crewman what was going on. "Jillian's throwing a temper tantrum," the crewman said, before continuing his flight in the other direction. It took a minute for the Undertaker to remember who that was. Jillian, blonde girl, one of the divas on Raw, he thought. That was pretty much the extent of what he knew about her, and it sounded like she had a real problem. As the designated locker room leader, the Undertaker had always taken it upon himself to sort out issues like this, so this seemed right up his alley. He followed the sound of Jillian's whining to her locker room, and then headed in her direction. Jillian sat crying in her dressing room. She was fed up with the fans and their complete lack of appreciation for her talents. As she was stewing, there was a knock on the door. "What?" she demanded. The Undertaker peeked his head in the door, and Jillian quickly wiped her face and sat up straight. "Hey, what's up?" she said. The Undertaker came in and closed the door. "Hey, I heard your tantrum outside. I wondered if everything was all right," he asked. Jillian threw another tissue in the trash and grabbed another. "No, I'm not," she proclaimed. "I'm frustrated." She blew her nose and threw the tissue away, as the Undertaker calmly waited for her to continue. "I go out there every night and give it my all, and yet all these people out there keep booing me." The Undertaker shrugged his shoulders and grabbed a chair, taking a seat right in front of her. He gently cupped her tear-streaked face. "Hey, sometimes it takes a while to strike a chord with them. Not everyone is going to like you right away. Sometimes you have to work a while in order to get the right reaction." Jillian sniffled, grabbing another tissue. "Really?" she asked. The Undertaker nodded in reply. "I've seen all kinds of people come and go in this business, and not all of them were liked right away. Some of them had to work at it. All I'm saying is, don't be so quick to give up." For the first time in a while, Jillian cracked a smile. "Thank you, Taker," she said. "Call me Mark." "Thank you, Mark." Jillian threw away her last tissue and headed toward the door to leave. Just as she was about to turn the knob, she went back to the Undertaker, placed her hands on both sides of his face, and kissed him. Mark was taken aback, too much in shock to even think about pushing her away. He wasn't even aware of the fact that he had stood up and was now kissing her back. Wasn't aware that Jillian had put her arms around his neck, or that he had put his own arms around her waist, and was pulling her in as close as he could as she kissed him deeper and probed his mouth with her tongue. After a few minutes they broke apart. "What was that for?" the Undertaker asked. Jillian smiled. "You're the only person who has ever said one word of encouragement to me. Everyone else is so mean," she replied. "Well, from now on, anytime you need to talk to someone, you just come to me. I'll always be around." The Undertaker replied. Jillian smiled even wider. "Thank you, Mark," she replied. "You're welcome, Jillian." The Undertaker turned to leave, but Jillian grabbed him by the shirt and thrust her mouth back into his again, thrusting her tongue back into his mouth. This time, the Undertaker returned the kiss immediately, his hands going down to Jillian's ass as her hands played around underneath his shirt. The Undertaker and Jillian made out for a few more minutes before Jillian broke off and pulled the Undertaker's shirt off. Taker did the same for her and then helped her pull the skirt off. They kissed again before Jillian undid the Undertaker's belt and pulled his jeans off. She pushed him down into the chair he had been sitting in, then climbed into his lap as he undid her bra. Their lips meeting again. She stood up and pulled off his boxers, then positioned herself over his member before Taker pulled her down again, watching her face as he filled her. Jillian wrapped her arms around the Undertaker as he settled down on him and then began to move up and down on him, neither one taking their eyes off of the other. They kept up the rhythm as they continued, kissing every so often. Their tongues probed each other's mouths. The Undertaker could taste Jillian's lipstick as she ran her lips over the Undertaker's thin beard. Eventually they both reached their climaxes. Jillian was still in the Undertaker's lap in the chair, resting her head on his shoulder. A few minutes later, she stood up and began to gather her clothes as he did the same. "God, I feel so much better," Jillian told the Undertaker, kissing him again. "Thank you so much. Now I can get back to my singing." A confused look came over the Undertaker's face. Singing? What singing? The end. This story is entitled Frozen Fire, Darkest Desire, and it is written by fanfiction.net user SweetCyn. I'm glad we're meeting again. I was starting to think I wouldn't see you again. Daffney grinned at Mark. What made you think that, sweetheart? He smirked before taking another sip of coffee. We haven't seen each other in 4 months. You realize how hard it is for me to not have sex for that long? She laughed. Well, I have a busy schedule, but now I'm going part-time. Maybe just 1 or 2 matches every year. So I promise we'll spend more time together. Starting tonight. He hated hearing her say that she hadn't had sex with anyone since their little cabin adventure. It meant that she was already taking things seriously, something Mark never did. He always liked to keep things simple. Sex with no strings. Winter understood. She enjoyed the same lifestyle he did. Fucking. Nothing more. Nothing less. Just pure, raw, unattached sex. Oh yeah! He began to wonder how the two would react to one another. Winter said she didn't mind if he added a third, but Daffney didn't strike him as the kind of woman that would want to be included in his and Winter's kind of pleasure. That's one reason he wants her to be their new toy. It would be perfect if she let them do what they wanted to her. Can I ask you something? He said, finishing his coffee. What? Daffney smiled, placing her hand over his. Would you mind somebody joined us tonight? He said, pulling off his cowboy hat and placing it on his knee. What? Why would you ask me that? She said, not liking where he was taking this. Just answer the question. Mark grinned. Well, who is the third person? It's not Kane, is it? He scares the shit out of me. Mark just laughed, while taking her hand in his and pulling Daffney into his lap. I would never let another man touch you while I was in the room. Her eyes got wide at his answer. Who is it? He felt her body tighten in his grip, so he pulled her down to his chest and whispered, Winter. Daffney sighed and looked up at him. I'll do it. Just don't expect it to happen very often. Mark smiled and lifted her up to her feet. Thanks! She's really been wanting me to do this ever since I suggested it. Mark smiled before leaving $15 on the tables, wrapping his arm around her waist, and walking over to his chopper. Get to the chopper! Here, I only brought one, he said, handing her his helmet and wrapping her arms and legs around his torso. Daffney was still on edge about what they were doing tonight. After a 3-hour drive, they finally arrived at his large ranch. Pulling up to the large house, Mark looked around in confusion, as he figured Katie would be there by now. Once inside, he showed Daffney the master bedroom, and handed her one of his shirts. Put this on. Wear only this until it's time. Daffney just nodded and began stripping off her clothes. Go on and take it off. Take it off. You gotta shake it off, baby, for me. Once she was down to just her panties, she reached for the shirt. I said you only wear this. Mark smiled, as he watched her remove the black fabric. Daffney grinned when she looked down at his midsection. Is that for me? She giggled, before reaching out and running her hand over his hardening member. Mark grunted and pushed her hand away from his groin. Once she had the shirt on, Mark led her back downstairs and into the locked basement. This is where the three of us will be spending the evening, once winter arrives. And when she does, you can no longer call me Mark for the rest of the night, and especially during our session. I will be referred to as the Undertaker, and her as Winter. Daffney just nodded. Her eyes told a unique tale of nervousness and arousal. She truly couldn't wait to see what happened tonight, but still felt that what the three of them were going to do was wrong and immoral. Please relax, Daffney. It won't be as bad as you think. Please trust me when I tell you that I wouldn't do anything to hurt you, unless you ask me to. He smirked. Daffney began examining the tools in his room, looking at the various vices, ropes, and steel toys laying about on the shelves, and large countertop built into the wall. The room itself was quite beautiful, clean, and almost white. There was a large steel table in the middle of the room, with a set of handcuffs on chain restraints in the middle, going down into the bottom of the table, connecting to a doll collar hanging from the ceiling. Why do you keep this room locked? Raven and Stevie never kept theirs locked, she asked, looking at him curiously. I'm not like Scott. I have a little bit of shame. Plus, I have someone that comes here every now and again, and I don't want them to see this room. She just nodded, wondering who he was talking about, but not wanting to pry. She then followed him up the stairs and into the kitchen. As the two of them got to the living room, Daffney couldn't resist curling next to him on the couch and wrapping both arms around his large midsection. He just smiled, pulling her closer. 11:45 p.m. Hello, Deadman. Winter laughed as she entered the Phenom's house. I told you not to call me that, he snapped. Well, I don't care. Where's our toy for the evening? She asked, looking around the living room. She's in the bathroom taking a shower. When you called, I told her to go clean up. He started before she put her hand to his lips. Why does she need a shower? What does she have to clean that you no doubt got dirty? Winter giggled. Taker just shook his head. She was already starting to piss him off. Go downstairs. We'll meet you there. Winter smirked and about flew towards the basement door. Taker went into the bathroom and said, Daffney, it's time. She quickly turned off the shower and got out. "Do I have time to dry myself?" she asked. Taker smirked, grabbed a towel, and began roughly patting down her wet flesh. He wasn't very gentle or subtle about his movements. She let out a small giggle as he rubbed the towel in her pussy lips, and then leaning between her ass cheeks, paying special attention to Daphne's back door. "I hope you cleaned all your holes, 'cause tonight there'll be filled." He laughed. She felt her body get tense at his words. The sinister grin and a hint of malice made her feel terrified and excited at the same time. The way his large hands felt against her tender skin. She would never admit it, but she started to develop feelings for him, desires that she thought were long dead. As he finished drying her, Daffney pulled him towards her and planted a kiss on his cheek. "Let's go have some fun." He grinned, wrapping an arm around her and walking towards the basement. Once down there, Winter immediately cracked her whip in Daphne's direction, causing the Scream Queen to jump back against Taker. "I'll bet you taste like honey," Winter said, walking over to Daphne and rubbing her perfectly shaved pussy. Daphne let out at the other woman's cold touch. "I'm sure the Undertaker has told you the rules, right?" She grinned, looking at Taker. "Yes. He told me to do whatever you all say, and not to call either of you by your real names." Winter nodded and then punched Daphne as hard as she could. "Very good, but I just asked you if he told you the rules. I never said you could speak." Daphne held her stomach and just nodded. "Now go lay on the table." Daphne nodded and quickly walked over and climbed on the cold steel platform. Almost immediately, Taker and Winter were at her side. "Get on your hands and knees," he commanded in a sinister tone. Daphne just nodded again, not wanting to get hit again, and took the position. The two of them pulled her legs apart and put them into the restraints at the corners. Undertaker then locked the handcuffs onto her slender wrist, while Winter wrapped the dog collar around Daphne's neck. "If you pull your arms too far up, you'll choke yourself," Winter laughed. She then lay down in front of Daphne and pulled her face towards her already dripping snatch. Mark undid his jeans and climbed on the table behind her and slowly slid his meat inside Daphne's tight pussy. "Ugh!" she let out as he invaded her sexy body. Winter grins and says, "You like that, don't you? Now, if you please." She laughed. Daphne lowered her mouth to the other woman and sucked her labia into her mouth. "Mmm," Winter moaned. Daphne smiled and pressed her tongue against Winter's sweet flesh, loving the sweet taste of her tight, craving pussy. Taker grunted and pushed himself all the way up into her wet heat, causing her to moan into Winter's sweet pussy. "Ooh," who dug her nails into Daphne's scalp, forcing her mouth to suck even more of Winter's flesh. "Ah!" The Brit threw her head back and screamed. Daphne grinned again and shoved 3 fingers knuckle deep into Winter's tight, wet pussy, causing the chain to slightly tighten around her neck. "Ah!" Daphne let out a small moan as the collar pulled against her skinny throat. Taker loved the sight of the two women pleasuring each other. He began pounding deeply into Daphne, causing her suck and pump Winter's cunt. "Ah, fuck! More!" she let out. Winter clutched Daphne's head and forced her snatch into the other woman's mouth and screamed, "Fuck!" as she came into Daphne's mouth. "Why do you always come so fast?" Taker asked between thrusts. "Shut up and pull out of her," Winter spat. Taker grinned and slowly moved his prick out of Daphne's wanting snatch. Winter grinned as she crawled to the edge of the table and spread Daphne's cheeks. She then surprised Taker by sliding her tongue into the raven-haired beauty's asshole. "Ugh," Daphne moaned as 2 of Winter's fingers found her clit. She had never gotten a rim job before, and the feeling of Winter's soft mouth assaulting her anal cavity while playing with Daphne's dripping box was both alien and sensual. Winter's tongue massaged Daffney's anus, slowly penetrating in and out, causing both women to moan in sweet ecstasy. Taker looked on impatiently, his throbbing heart-on begging to join the two beauties in front of him. "Hurry up, damn it! I don't like waiting," he snapped. Winter moved her mouth away and pulled the Phenom's thick rod close to Daffney. "I want you to fuck her in the ass while I enjoy her pussy," the Brit said, before getting off the table and walking over to the counter. She smiled when she spotted and picked up her favorite tool, a 12-inch long steel vibrator. "Daffney, darling, I envy what the Deadman and I are about to do to your delicious body," Winter said as she walked over to her two lovers and turned on the toy. She placed the tip of the vibrator at Daffney's clit, causing a not-so-strangled moan to escape the other woman's lips, then eased it into her soft pussy lips. Daffney let out, biting her tongue. Taker placed his cock at her anal opening and pressed himself forward, quietly thanking Winter's mouth and Daffney's juices for the much-needed lube. "Oh, God!" Daffney huffed at the sensation of the double penetration. Soon, Taker and Winter found themselves settled deep inside Daffney, whose moans could potentially be heard from the street. Once her small body got used to being fucked by Winter's mechanical shaft and Taker's meat, she began pushing back against them. "I think she wants more," he grunted, loving the way her tight ass grasped his cock, with a slight vibration coming from her core. Winter nodded and began twisting the toy in and out, while the Undertaker started to move himself against her anal walls. The sound of Daffney's moans and the slapping of flesh rang loud throughout the basement. Taker grabbed a hold of the chain, pulling it, causing her head and neck to jerk back hard. He also began pounding into her, while Winter squeezed and twisted the other woman's right breast and nipple, in addition to pushing the stilled toy deeper into her tight, wet pussy. Daffney moaned. She could feel her climax building, but wasn't sure if the duo would want or allow her body the sweet release it was desperately wanting. "I need to come," she said, trying to clamp down on her urges. "Then do it!" The Undertaker and Winter spat out. Daffney started to push back against his cock and Winter's toy, forcing them deeper into her body. Taker couldn't handle much of this, and soon shot his spunk deep in her ass, sending Daffney over the edge. "Oh, fuck!" She let out at the feeling of a seed covering her insides. Taker and Winter both pulled out. He smirked and lowered his lips towards hers, darting his tongue into her mouth and fighting her own appendage. He let his hands explore Winter's sweet body, loving the way her smooth skin felt against his rough, calloused hands. He pushed her body back onto the table and lined his cock up with her entrance. "Hold on, I'm not going to let you fuck me after it's been in her cunt and up her ass. She must clean it first." Her smile turned sinister. "What?" Daffney stammered. "Yes, you must clean his cock of all the nastiness your body left on it." Winter smiled. She then undid Daffney's restraints and said, "Now go over there and suck his delicious cock that you defiled." Taker sighed. He knew Daffney didn't want to do this, and neither did he want her to. But Winter insisted. She could be cruel to anyone that was weaker than her. That's one reason he was attracted to Winter. She was a lot like him and could match him. "She doesn't have to do this," he said. "No, she doesn't have to, but I want her to. And you told Daffney that she was to do whatever we want." Winter giggled. "It's okay, Ma. I mean, Undertaker. I'll do it. It can't taste too bad," Daffney whispered. She sighed and took his cock into her mouth. She gagged. It tasted bitter and disgusting. She could also taste a little bit of sweetness on it. "That must be my pussy," she thought. "Start sucking, bitch," Winter yelled, and grasped onto the back of Daffney's neck and forced him into her throat. Taker had enough, and backhanded Winter across the face. "Damn it, Katie. She doesn't want to do it. She's not a fucking cum rag like you, he boomed. Taker pulled away from Daffney and yanked Winter to the center of the table. What? Have you finally found someone to love? She taunted him. The Undertaker growled and put her hands behind her back and cuffed them. He then attached the dog collar and forced her onto her side. Put the vibrator up her asshole and leave it on high. Winter's eyes got wide and she began fighting against the cuffs. Taker, I don't think... Daffney started. Just do it. He smiled. Daffney nodded and climbed off the table. She took the toy in her hand and walked behind Winter. The Brit started to protest, but Undertaker stuffed her mouth a ball gag. You're going to spend the night down here, and tomorrow morning, you're going to leave. Our arrangement is over. Daffney swallowed hard at his words. She shrugged it off and rammed the steel toy up Winter's ass. Now stay here and be a good girl, he whispered into her ear. Taker then put his arm around Daffney and led her upstairs. You don't ever have to do anything like that, or around me again. Ever. He smiled down at her. The two of them took a hot shower together and ended up sleeping in Mark's large bed. After a third, mind-blowing orgasm, Daffney curled up next to her lover. Mark? She asked, sitting on her knees. Yeah, baby? He smiled, running a hand across her back. I just want you to know, I don't have any illusions of the two of us living happily ever after. But tonight, I just want to be yours for a few more hours. Mark nodded and pulled her into his lap. Tonight, I'll do anything you want. Aww. They both smiled and embraced in a deep kiss. 8 a.m. The next morning, Mark went down to let Winter out of her chains. Thank you. I was beginning to wonder. She started, before he held up his hand. Look, Katie, I was a little rougher than I should have been last night. But Daffney isn't like you or me. She's not used to that kind of sex. She didn't really want to be here with both of us last night. All she wanted was to have a good time. Mark put her bra, jeans, heels, and shirt on the table and handed Katie her car keys. I know, Mark, and I may have gotten carried away with our pleasures. Tell her I'm sorry, and that I hope we can all still be cordial after this. After all, she and I still work together. He shook his head and said, if you want her to know that, go tell her yourself. He then went up to the living room and sat with Daffney while Katie got dressed. Once finished putting her clothes on, Katie went up to where Mark and Daffney sat and said, Shannon, I just want to apologize about last night. I was too far into what we were doing and got out of line. Shannon nodded and wrapped her arms around Katie's neck, whispering into her ear, accepted, but next time I'm putting my foot up your ass, literally. Shannon sat back down with Mark, who looked perplexed. You still want her to join us? She nodded and said, one awkward moment didn't change the fact that I did enjoy what the three of us did together. After thinking about it all night, I would love for the three of us to do it again. Her smile was intoxicating to him, and all Mark could do was nod. Why don't you stay here with us, and then you and I can go to Orlando together? Shannon suggested. Mark pinched her nose and said, don't invite guests into my house. He laughed. Then it settled. She's staying. She beamed up at him. Fine? He shook his head and patted a spot on the couch. Katie quickly sat down next to him and curled up next to him, similar to Shannon. The two of them teased him by running their hands over his midsection. Stop now, he said, trying to sound serious. It wasn't working. Mark, yesterday you said someone would come over every now and then. Who is it? Shannon asked. Wait, you haven't told her about Julie? Katie looked up at him. Who is she, Katie? An old girlfriend? Shannon looked at the other woman. No, she's my daughter, and she's 10. If she ever comes by when one, or both of you all, are here, just tell her you're a friend from work. She doesn't know how I live my sex life, and I intend to keep it that way. Both women nodded and gripped tighter around him, while he squeezed each of their legs. This should be interesting, Mark thought. 4 years later, Mark had just lost to Brock at Mania.
The streak is over!
On the outside, he was upset, but inside, he couldn't be happier. He had 2 beautiful women laying in bed waiting for him, while his 13, going on 14-year-old daughter slept with her 2 younger brothers in the other bed. Ew! A year after their first romp, both women found themselves pregnant, 6 weeks apart. So Mark just moved them in with him and Julie. He had gotten full custody of her after her mother and stepfather had been abusing drugs and leaving the raven-haired girl alone for days on end. None of it really mattered to him. He had all his girls in one place, and that's all that mattered. He finally found the perfect fix, a happy life. The end. Thank you for listening to episode number 35 of Wrestlerotica. We hope that you enjoyed this week's stories. If you enjoyed the stories, please be sure to like and review us on iTunes. Also, be sure to check us out elsewhere on the internet, including Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, and as always, our official website, WrestleRoticaPod.com. Thank you and have a good week.